Hello, this is an introductory video for the study of administrative law. The plan here is to give you some of the basics about what's involved, what the approach of the course is going to be, so that you can get the foundations laid before we start with the first module next week. Alright, first question, what is administrative law? It's an area of law that has evolved in an interesting way over the years to control what governments do. In fact, the textbook we're using in this course steps away from the convention of calling itself administrative law and calls itself control of government action. And I mean, that's a very on-the-nose title for a book, but it's really accurate. Not very exciting, but it's pretty accurate. So it's about the use of law and legal processes, whether they come from common law or they come from statute, to control what governments do. As such, it's part of the field of public law. And public law, we've got constitutional law, admin law, and public international law. And each of those topics, each of those subjects, regulates the way in which governments act in different fields. So, throwing your mind back to the doctrine of separation of powers, which we're going to come back again and again and again to this term, constitutional law is about control of the legislature, what the government does in its lawmaking powers. Administrative law is kind of everything else. It's everyone from the ministers through to all the way down to sort of the dog catcher and local authorities. And once upon a time, there was really a power imbalance between constitutional law, which was the very serious subject, which was most of government action, and admin law, which was really pretty much seen as minor works done by, low-level flunkies. But as society has changed, admin law, government, that part of government has grown and grown and grown, and as has the importance of admin law. So when we look back again to that doctrine of separation of powers, we've got legislature, executive and judiciary. And of course in the Westminster system we've got that uncomfortable kind of ministers being part of the legislature. They're elected members of parliament, but they're also heads of bureaucracies, so they're also part of the executive. We'll talk about this and some of these other topics in more depth in Module 1. But we have the judiciary, where there's a sort of a brick wall between those and other elements of government. Now, in terms of the judiciary, how are they held accountable? Well, that's what we do in every other subject in the law course. The whole idea of having appeals and appeal courts is the way in which the judicial arm of government is kept accountable. So what we're left with is the legislature and executive, and as I said, legislature, constitutional law, executive, administrative law. All right, there's all sorts of different interesting conundrums and exceptions that have come up, and we'll be discussing these throughout the term. But I want to just indicate that admin law was, in its early years, very much seen as sort of the poorer cousin for constitutional law, which dealt with the serious matter of governmental power. But we're beginning to realise that administration, that the executive part of government has so much more power, increasing levels of power. We've seen internationally a growth of the idea of executive orders, which we're going to talk about, to basically circumvent the legislative process. Obviously America has been a pioneer in that area, but in Australia we're also pushing that idea of non-elected people wielding that sort of uncontrolled power. Of course, in America, the executive is headed by a president who is elected. In Australia, it's headed by a governor-general who's not elected. So generally, the American situation is a little different, and we will talk about that there. But here we're really talking about who regulates, who governs unelected decision-makers, unelected power systems. And the other thing we're going to look at is the rise of use of automated systems and what that means. And we'll be looking at the Robodebt catastrophe as a case study of where things go terribly wrong, because increasingly we're being governed by algorithms rather than people, and there's much harder to regulate and control what algorithms will do, as the inquiry into Robodebt showed us. So there's lots of interesting things to go, and while we're on that, I want to sort of deal with the issue of the mythology that can exist around administrative law. I hear all the time that it's a hard subject, students being advised to put it back until their final year because it's so difficult. I've even had colleagues say, when I've suggested we could move admin law to first year, saying, oh, you can't do that, admin law. No first year student could cope with admin law. That's all nonsense. Admin law is one of the most intuitive, straightforward, easy to apply areas of law. I'm not sure where this reputation came from. I guess one thing is that it does work in quite a different way to your contracts and your torts. There's a different sort of operating way of operating that might be responsible for that. But personally, I mean, my first academic job was teaching admin law to police and corrections students. So, I know, like I think it's a very easy subject to get your head around. It's a very, very practical subject because who amongst us has not, had issues with what government does, with what bureaucrats do, with the processes, because it's about more than just decisions. It's about the processes that are used, and who among us has not dealt with annoying bureaucracies. Before I go any further, I should mention that admin law also governs the university as a public body. So that's something exciting that you might want to keep in your back pocket and give you some reason why you want to study admin law, because it may come in handy for you in your studies. All right, so I talked a little bit about public law again. I'm going to go over that again in the future. But public law is kind of a different area of lawyering to private law. And one of the reasons for that is that it's not only a matter of advocacy. We use advocacy as the model for teaching in many other areas of law. You've got a client who's aggrieved and you seek a remedy. Now, we do that in admin law as well. But admin law also covers a lot of us in our professional lives. If we work for a public body, we are regulated by admin law. So it not only regulates the decisions that we make, but if we end up in leadership roles, it also regulates the kinds of systems and procedures that we set up. And that's what I think is one of the most interesting parts of administrative law, and it's one of the things we're going to look as a focus this term. Because you spend a lot of time in a law degree talking about that advocacy role and representing clients. We don't want to miss out on that, but we also want to look at this interesting idea of admin law building a system or a framework for good government, for good management. And while it applies strictly speaking to public bodies, some of the principles are pretty good ideas, giving people the right to be heard, treating people fairly. That's all pretty good for private entities as well. So one of the things we're going to look at here is a different sort of set of legal skills, a different sort of career path, which is admin law as systems building, as creating systems that are accountable, transparent, and are good for everyone. Because honestly speaking, the best admin law case is one that never happens. It's a situation where your government systems are open, accountable, and fair, and no one ever comes to grief with it. Therefore, no appeal to admin law. Therefore, it doesn't ever get activated. We're going to be looking at a different set of skills in this unit. We're going to be looking at systems analysis, a little bit of organisational theory, and we're definitely going to look at the idea of leadership, what leadership means in the context of a situation where you have to design systems, procedures, paperwork, and so on, and do it in a way that is fair, accountable, and therefore in the future means there's less time spent in legal wrangles over that situation. So I hope that you'll find that kind of interesting. This also ties into the idea of leadership and what leadership means when you are creating and administering systems. Again, Robodebt's a great example of a total failure of leadership at all levels in the creation of that system and what a disaster that leads to. And I want to tie that back to your graduate outcomes, because one of the graduate outcomes that we are required to cover in the course is teamwork and communications. And as soon as I say teamwork, I know everyone's going, oh, group projects, group assignments, and don't worry, we're not going to hit that in this subject, because I think, apart from the fact everyone hates group assignments, including me, they're not a realistic expression of how teamwork actually works in the real world, in law, or as far as I know, any other field. But I do think so. I think group assignments are just generally used as an easy way to hit that mark, or easy for the top level people to do that. Not so easy for students who have to do it. So what I want to spin that idea of teamwork, and I'll spin that idea about teamwork as leadership, and the idea of teamwork as building systems that teams can work in, that organisations can work in. So again, I will return to that theme later on, but one of the things I want to do is to start thinking about what leadership looks like, because, you know, you're all going to end up in leadership roles at some point in your professional lives. What does that mean about the kinds of decisions you make and the kinds of systems that you set up? And everything from the top level, you know, systems of reporting and accountability, down to the paperwork that gets designed, or the way that your offices are laid out, in terms of, you know, being open and accountable to the public or clients or whatever. So I think there's a lot of really interesting skills that spin off of the concepts that are raised in admin law. So to recap a little bit, admin law is about fair, open and accountable decision making, and about creating systems that are accessible to everyone. And my argument here, bear with me, is that directly ties into the idea of professional leadership, and that gives us a way of exploring and assessing that doesn't mean, you know, here's a 4,000 word group assignment, good luck with getting everyone to be on the same page with that. So what that means practically is that in terms of the tutorials, with this, they're very much split into two. They're 2 hours, so we roughly we'll be doing an A side and a B side. So the A side is really focused on the conventional kind of stuff that's in the textbook. What are the principles? What are the rules? What are the authorities? How does it all apply? As much as it does in some areas of administrative law, because a large area is not governed by the precedent. It's not governed by conventional ideas of law, and we'll come back to that again. But so the A side is your traditional admin law. The B side is going to be exploring the practical context, the way in which this fits into the admin law fits into society, how it fits into our ideas of democracy, and how it fits into those ideas of leadership, and organisational practice. So I find that stuff really interesting. I'm really interested in things like human-centered design and all that sort of stuff. I hope you're not rolling your eyes too much and thinking, oh God, this sounds awful. Bear with me. I hope some of my enthusiasm will can be transferred over, and you can see this as an opportunity to invest in some sort of lifelong skills that even if you don't end up working as a lawyer in legal practice, and many of us don't do that, that these are really valuable concepts to go with. All right, so I don't want to go into too much more detail here. This was meant to be sort of a quick, and it's already 13 minutes, a quick introduction. There are a couple of extra videos that are introductory. There is one on how to make the most of your learning resources. That's a general one for encouraging you to think about the ways in which you study across all the subjects that you're going to study. And yes, you've probably already done a year of study at this point. You might think you know it all already, but please have a look at that, because I think there's some good guidance there as to how to improve and to do more with the resources you're provided. And of course there is a separate video on assessment, because people don't want to scrub through a whole 20-minute video to get to that point every time they want to look at the assessment video. So I'll keep that one separate as well. So finally, I hope that you're going to enjoy this unit. It's a bit different to the other units that you study, but I think it's one that's not too difficult. because it's so applicable. It's one where you can actually see the everyday applications of the area of law, and I also think it's one that's thought-provoking, so it gives you that little bit more inspiration or motivation to study, because it's about these fundamental things about what is government do, and how do we hold it accountable. So I hope you are going to enjoy this whole process.